using the Spatial SDK software developers kit for Unity. What we want to do is build a world in Unity using the Spatial SDK. That's the package that integrates Unity with that spatial website that you've been working with. Most of what you need to know to get started is here at this website, support.spatial.io, an article called Spatial Creator Toolkit Unity SDK. This link takes you to documents that show you how to create worlds, quests, vehicles, just like any true game developer. And you can even go deeper into spaces and space templates, custom avatars and animations, drivable vehicles, quest building, interactivity and visual scripting, and avatar attachments. There's a whole world to explore here. And Spatial has all the getting started documents for you in docs.spatial.io/getting started. For this project, I'm not starting with a provided spatial scene, but starting with a Unity project that I was already working on called Rosebud Drone and have created a world for. I used some drone footage that I grabbed by flying over a part of the Rosebud property and pulled the mesh model from Polycam in Unity and placed it on a plane with a Google satellite map of the area that I got from Blender GIS. I then pulled in a few animals and a school bus, making sure you have the correct version of Unity that works with Spatial. The issue that I found, and that you might find if you've already worked in Unity, is that I do most of my world building in Unity in whatever the latest version of Unity is. I created this one in 2020.3.8 F1. And as you'll discover, each program that you want to world build for has its own version of Unity that it talks to, and only that version, until the company updates their SDK. Spatial Creator, as of this writing, uses 2021.3.21. It doesn't use any of the 2021 other versions, and it doesn't use 2022 versions or 2023 versions yet. Fortunately, Unity lets us import the file that we make in any version of Unity into any other version of Unity. And so I get this. To make this landscape work for Spatial, having opened my previous project, I must select all of my assets under Assets in my project panel. Once selected, I click the Export package under the Assets menu in the main toolbar, and then I save this somewhere on my hard drive. It'll take a while for all the assets to get exported and packaged. And during this time, you'll want to ensure you've imported the starter template for the Unity Spatial SDK, because that's what you're going to be using. So, importing the Spatial SDK for Unity into your Unity project. Each Unity project you create has to have its own SDKs and assets imported. Once you're working in a project that has all the correct add-ons or packages loaded, you can then create multiple scenes within that project, but each project is distinct. The Spatial Unity Starter template comes into your computer's Downloads folder as a zip file. Unlike using add-ons in Blender 3D, which stay zipped, you may recall from Blender GIS, Unity demands that you unzip their files. So, I unzip mine to an external SSD hard drive. We highly recommend this for all assets related to your project, so you can move to a different machine if you need to. These assets take up a lot of space, and if your computer crashes or you have problems or you can't access that computer, then you can be in a pickle. So it's really good to keep all of your assets on the dedicated SSD hard drive. That's the solid state drive. It doesn't have a spinning disk, which can crash. So spend the extra money and get an SSD hard drive. And then, as they say, bringing your assets into this project is the easiest way to ensure your package will work correctly in Spatial. That's what we want to do. Bring your assets, bring your previous projects, bring whatever you've been working on into the starter template that they have provided. Now, once your asset package has been created, you'll find it in the folder that you sent it to. In my case, I like to place it in the starter package folder in the subfolder there called Packages. using Unity Hub to keep projects organized. Next, I open Unity Hub. That's where I usually start new projects, and go to Open Project. The project I want to open is the Spatial Unity Template main folder, so don't be fooled. You're not going to open the project that you've been creating. You're going to open the Spatial Unity Template main folder project, because that has all of the coding necessary to be able then to upload it to Spatial. So you're trying to drag your package, your project's material assets into this Spatial Unity Template main folder project in that correct version. You should see the Spatial SDK tab in the menu. And on the right side, a Spatial Tools window that lets you link to your Spatial account, do configuration, and learn about any issues. If those features are all there, then you are using the Spatial SDK project template. With the starter template project opened, select Assets, Import Package, Custom Package, and then select the file that you saved earlier. It could take a while saying Preparing Package. And then it will show a window asking what assets you would like to import. I'm doing everything for now, and when it's done, you won't see anything change. You must look in the project folder to see all the assets you brought in. They'll be listed alphabetically. You will see in my example that whereas before I had only examples, spatial, and text mesh pro, I now have my animal assets and my Rescue 3D Rosebud assets and folders for scenes and settings and tutorial info. Once I've loaded my scene, I want to configure it for Spatial. Testing the active scene in the Spatial sandbox and error messages. One thing to note is that when you bring a package that you've exported from one version of Unity to another and started a new project, you're going to have to rebuild that project using all the assets that you imported with the package. So that means we have to go in and bring in the vehicles and bring in the animals and bring in the avatars and reset the scene. So we will have, of course, our skybox and our landscape and our GIS map, and we have all the assets, but now they have to be re-imported, and sometimes the textures have to be put back in too. Once you have a world to publish, even if it isn't finished, you need to test it first in Spatial. Note that with this SDK, you can't simply hit play in Unity as you would normally do. You need to test things that you're creating in a sandbox that Spatial creates for you and that you upload to from Unity. So you hit the Test Active Scene button each time you want to try the gameplay. When I try then to test Active Scene, which you should always do before you publish, it gives me error messages. It tells us, for example, that we need a thumbnail camera, that we don't have an entrance point for our avatar to spawn into the world, and that the audio listener component I had in the old world is unsupported. It also tells me that my model has 72 mesh vertices more than the upper limit. And it does give me the option to try an autofix. So don't panic. This is the AI diagnosing your world and catching errors so that it'll work within the Spatial program. So after that fix, which I click on the auto fix, which did put a thumbnail camera in the scene, it gives me more errors. One of them is that there's no thumbnail assigned, so I have to drag a screenshot of the space into that field. It then tells me that the thumbnail must have a 1024 by 512 aspect ratio. So I open the image up in Paint and resize it. and then I add it. Then when I bring it in, I can assign it to the active package thumbnail, and it works fine. See, so it's telling you all along what the problems are and how to fix them. You just have to pay attention and experiment. The problem now, it tells me, is that there's no entrance point for my spatial avatar, but the SDK has an autofix for that. So I click autofix. Now the AI diagnostics detect that unsupported component and delete it for us when we execute the autofix. Now what's wrong? This process will have you tearing your hair out, but it is amazing how helpful the AI is. It's letting us know that the grass and the map below our feet aren't solid ground. They have no active collider. Putting active colliders in the world. So remember in the tutorial for creating a custom environment in Spatial when we tried to use the Florida wetland boardwalk and our avatar kept falling through? This is how to avoid that in our own Unity created environments. So we need to add that component to what we want the ground our planet walker walks on to be. I select the plane with the satellite image on it and add a component called a box collider. After doing that and hitting refresh, I also want to put a mesh collider on the actual photogrammetry model so people can climb up on the dragon and the roofs and not walk through them like ghosts. There, when I hit refresh, the AI tells me that is fixed. And now my issue is the excess number of vertices. The SDK is nice enough to actually tell us which meshes are causing the problem, and we see that the school bus, which is a far too complex model for what we're trying to do, is the prime offender. So I'll decide to remove the bus from the basic world, knowing we can always add it later as a separate model brought into Spatial from within the game itself, as we've been doing. The Unity world should be basically the set piece, the things that don't move, the things that you want to be permanent. Alas, this doesn't completely fix things. Our photogrammetry mesh is way too big too, and really needs to be reduced and simplified. But that's something we can work on later, using the techniques shown in the photogrammetry tutorials for this course. For now, the SDK will let us do an active test and even publish while warning us about performance issues. So let's test the scene. We press Test Active Scene again up at the top right, and it loads the scene into a Spatial website called My Sandbox. There you can see how well your avatar interacts with the world. We note that because we didn't put mesh or box colliders on the animals, we can walk right through them. The landscape does let us jump around on things. The animal animations play too, so that adds a level of realism. Those animations came from the package that I bought for animals to bring into Unity from the Unity asset store. Now, making a bear you can pilot and move around your spatial wildlife corridor using Spatial SDK prefabs. So we already had a bear model in the world, and we want to be able to pilot the bear. To do this, I've discovered a neat trick. The Spatial SDK comes with some pre-scripted prefabs and object models that we can modify to serve our purposes as sustainabilitists. We start with the provided Spatian Spaceman avatar, and then with the golf cart. And that actually works because after all, at Rosebud Continuum Ecoscience Center, we do have solar electric golf carts, as do many wildlife parks. Now by simply dragging the prefab in, we can now hit Test Active Scene again and see if we can drive it around in our My Sandbox area. So it works, and that's fun, and it works well. So now, what about driving a bear? In theory, we should be able to swap the golf cart model for the bear model and keep the underlying scripting intact so we don't have to do any coding. Let's see. Let's duplicate both the golf cart and the bear by selecting them and hitting Shift-D for each. After much experimentation and lots of YouTube tutorial watching, I found I was unable to swap out the bear for the car part successfully, but I did discover a much easier technique that works. We can put the bear into the golf cart with its back where the driver's seat is and make it a child of the golf cart so it moves around with the golf cart. And then simply make the golf cart invisible. It'll still take up some memory, it's still there, but it's got its scripts intact. You just can't see it. So here the bear is positioned so the small of his back is in the driver's seat. And you can see we put the bear prefab into the model area of the golf cart as its child. And then we select the golf cart prefab in the hierarchy and simply uncheck it in the inspector. And the golf cart disappears from view. Now let's test the active scene. Well, it did work, but before I could get on the bear, it reared up on its hind legs and it had a heart attack and fell over dead, so I ended up driving a carcass around. Now this happened because the bear that I imported from the Unity asset store had a rig and an animation attached. And I don't know enough yet to make the animation simply idle like the other animals do, so when we launch Spatial, it plays through the death scene of the bear, and until we can figure out how to change the bear animation, we'll simply turn it off. To do that, simply uncheck the animator checkbox. That won't be as exciting, but at least it will work as a vehicle. Now when you test active scene, be prepared that sometimes you'll find your avatar flailing about, falling through the floor. Refresh your browser, and often that fixes the problem. Now we're riding the bear using the same WASD keys in Spatial that we used to ride the golf cart. Of course, we are sitting in the middle of the bear, so that's awkward, unless we could make our avatar invisible, in which case it would appear that we turned into the bear. We don't know how to do that yet either. So let's just adjust the golf cart seat entry position slightly, keeping the bare feet on the ground. And voila, it works. We can now drive the bear around Rosebud, around our part of the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Now we are still running into this problem of the bear animation. And as you can see, while we took away the death animation, it still rears up on its hind legs. And so we've got to go and transform that. And that means going into the animator. Now, when you go into the animator, as you can see, there are these graphics that show when you enter the world, that's in green, and then it goes with an orange arrow to the first idle animation, And then there are other arrows in white that go to all the different animations that came with the Animal Pack Deluxe bear. Now, what I've done is uncheck the attack and the eat animations, just as you see the die animation is unchecked. And when I save it now and go back, I should be able to ride the bear without having any of these other animations play. So let's check that out, see what it looks like. It doesn't take as long to load each time you make a change, as you can see now, as it took the first time. So here we are, we're in the world, and we walk over to the bear that is really the golf cart and press F to sit on it. And there, as you can see, it's playing the idling animation and occasionally moving to a walk animation. So it isn't ideal, but at least the bear is no longer rearing up on its hind legs with the attack, and it's not doing the die animation. So let's now take a look at how we can fix this. Okay, so let's start from scratch. We are going into the bear model and clicking on the animator, and you can see each of the animation controllers has its own icon. And this is the way it originally looked when we brought it in from the deluxe pack. It had connections to all the different animations in there: attack, eat, walk, run, die. And what I'm going to do is make a copy of it that I can modify and apply to the bear, because I don't want to mess with what Unity already gave me. So I've made a copy, and that copy is the one that I'm going to edit. So I'm going to double click on that copy to open it. Of course, it looks identical to the original. And now that I'm in that copy, I'm going to remove the die animation. I'm going to remove the attack animation. I'm going to remove the eat animations. I'm going to remove, well, I'll keep the walk and the run. I have the entry, and from entry, do I want it to go to idle? No, I want it to go straight to walk. Originally, as you can see in the prefab, it goes to everything. I'm now moving my copy into the prefab, into the controller. So I've replaced the original with the copy that I made that I have modified. And I'm going to test it and see what happens. So I'm going to test active scene. Okay, so let's test that out. Right now, when we walk over to the bear is already idling upon entry into the world, and it is going through a walk sequence. We can get on the bear. It keeps going back to idle from walk and back to idle from walk. So what we want to do is get rid of the idle. So I'm going to emphasize entry straight to walk right now and see what that does. So let's go and make that the principal or default transition, not the idle. And then I'm going to take out everything else. So now all I have is entry to walk. As soon as we get in the world now, it should just start walking. That means that even before I get on the bear is walking. Once we've entered into the world, let's check that out. And here we go, we're in the world. As you can see, the bear that we have modified is indeed walking. It just walks all the time, whereas the other bear, which uses the default animation, goes through all of the sequence that was programmed. Our bear animation controller is just a constant walk from the moment you enter. And that looks good for riding the bear. It's just, wouldn't it be nice if the bear was standing still and idling when we came into the world and only started walking once we get on the bear, and then stopped walking when we got off? That would make more game logic sense. So that's what we have to explore now. I learned all of this through trial and error, so you can go through the trial and error with me. I'm now connecting entry to walk and then walk to run and back to walk with another connection to idle back and forth. I wonder what that's going to do. This is a way of learning the game's logic. Experimentation is the best way to learn. Making mistakes is the best way to learn. Trial and error. So let's see now that we have made it go entry to walk to run with a loop back to both walk and to idle. Does that do what we want? So obviously the bear now is in idle, and from idle it goes to walk run and then idle, and then shakes his head in idle and then walk run, and then also obviously that's not what we want. So we go back to the drawing board and we say, well, let's get rid of the idle, and now we've got entry to walk, run back to walk. And you can see that when you click on it over on the right side, that is the length of time it spends in each animation that I'm showing here. There's a timeline in there, and you can manipulate the amount of time each animation plays. So now as we go back to test, let's see what that change did. Well, apparently all it does is walk and run and walk and run and walk and run and walk and run and walk and run. And that's great. We're learning now what the animation controller does, but that's not what we want. So let's go back to the drawing board. Okay, now we want to go to the bear model and tell it which animations we want to trigger with which events. We're working with colliders, and we want to add a box collider component to the bear model so that Spatial recognizes a trigger event area. So we're going to click on the bear and go to Add Component and select Box Collider. Be careful that the box isn't under the bear, or it will fall over as the invisible box under the bear interacts with the ground. That's awkward. What you want to do is edit the collider so that the box does not interfere with the bear's feet. You can stretch and squash the green box with the green dot handles. Aligning the box so that it doesn't play havoc with the physics may be a pain, but if you get it right, and you must make sure the golf cart mesh is deselected so its collider doesn't interact with the bear's box collider, you should get a good result. Here's the shape that worked for me. Now, test your active scene, and if it works, we can go back to the bear model and open up the animator that we made and create triggers for different animations. We do this by going to the Parameters tab on the top left, after the Layers tab, which it might be on by default, and clicking on the plus sign and adding Trigger. Add one trigger you call TR Walk, another called TR Run. That will be Trigger Walk and Trigger Run. TR Walk and TR Run. Triggers for the walk animation and for the run animation. Connect the entry, the green node state, to the idle animation and set it as a default. Right-click on it and it turns orange, so that the bear will be doing the idle animation when we first enter the scene. Connect the any state node to both walk and run animation nodes. Now click on the transition line for each and make sure to add condition. That's the key. Add condition with the plus sign, and select the transition trigger that's appropriate from the drop-down. TR Walk for the walking condition, and TR Run for the running condition. Having set this up, we can go back to our golf cart. The golf cart object, although invisible, already has an interactable component set up, so we can drive it. What we're going to do here is also tell it to start playing the triggered bear animation when we get in the vehicle. So we hit plus under Animator Event and drag the Brown Bear Prefab 1 graph animation and select our TR Walk as the trigger. Now when we test it, we see that the bear is idling until we interact with it to sit on it and drive it. And then after a few seconds, the walk cycle begins. Jump off the bear, and it now stops and goes back into the idle animation. And then of course, when we get back on the bear, it starts walking again. So this is successful and it works. Jump off the bear using F and walk over to the animal walker's spirit, and you can now influence the bear as a ghostly guide, taking it to safe crossings and back to the corridor. And it is to this task that we will turn in our 7th and final video in this series.